All right. Now, one of the reasons that I invited my next guest on is because she's been in the news again, prominent politician and civil servant Christine Rankin, for being hired by a charitable organisation and only receiving a tenth of her salary before the board said it didn't have any money, and its chief executive was told by the board that they didn't actually have the chief executive didn't have the authority to employ anyone. And I can imagine Christine Rankin's pretty upset about that. We'll talk to her about that in a moment. But it's quite a propitious interview in lots of ways, having Christine on the show this afternoon, because in the wake of the conversation we've had this morning over the last couple of hours, and in particular of the announcement that was made yesterday by the Prime Minister relating to fresh fruit and vegetables and other measures designed to alleviate suffering from many of the people that Christine would have dealt with in her former job as Chief Executive of the Ministry of Social Development. She joins us now. Christine, welcome to the show. Thanks very much. Lovely to have you on.
Oh, good afternoon, Michael.
I'm just thinking, in your former job, I was going to interview you about the other matter, but just before we get there, you're obviously the expert when it comes to trying to, at least bureaucratically, lift people out of their lives of penury and disadvantage and despair in your former role as the Head of Ministry of Social Development. In your opinion, will yesterday's announcement make any difference?
No, absolutely not. It's ridiculous. It's not going to touch those people at all. And, Michael, I think most people in New Zealand most average New Zealanders think that everyone else lives like them. There are people who struggle, who've never ever been subject to a normal life and have no idea how to survive. A lot of people have never boiled an egg. I know it sounds ridiculous to even talk about this, but they've never made a pot of porridge, they've never boiled an egg, they've never cooked a vegetable, so they wouldn't know what to do with it if they fell over it. That is the reality for a lot of our people. They live from takeaway to takeaway, and their kids often don't eat. And, we think it's all nice. It's not nice. There's quite a component that is so dysfunctional, they wouldn't even know this was happening, and it certainly won't affect them. There is another group, I suppose, that's above the level of benefit where it might have some tiny effect, but I really can't imagine it. It's a ridiculous policy. It's a policy of desperation from where I sit.
If you were still the head of the Ministry of Social Development and this policy had presumably been passed through your organisation prior to its public announcement, would you have been as clear and direct as you are with me now?
I would have been to the minister. I would have been forbidden to say that publicly. There's no way that you're allowed to do anything like that. But I would have been very, very clear with the minister that it would have no effect. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we do know how to get people out of poverty and how to change their lives. It is the will of a government to make it happen. And, they talk about boot camps, for example. I did boot camps back in my time in Work and Income, and I used to send my long-term people to boot camp at the Army at Burnham. And I cannot tell, I went to every passing out parade, and those kids used to cry to me because they didn't want to go home. For the first time in their lives, Michael, they'd sat at a table with a knife and a fork. They'd eaten 3 meals a day. Yep. They learned what it was to have a shower and wash your clothes and to be disciplined and to get up in the morning. And a lot of them wanted to stay in the Army and couldn't because they had drug convictions. But we didn't send them home. We set them up with a new life somewhere else, but that was really hard for them to maintain. But, a government can have a view of how to get these people out of the situation they're in, to give them what they dream about giving them, and that's what I focused my people on. And we were incredibly successful. People came from all over the world to see how we ran that department, and I went all over the world to talk about it. I just happened to fall foul of a government who didn't like how I looked and didn't like how I led. In fact, Labor hated the results they got. They told me I should be ashamed.
So, in essence, really, I mean, you are a natural Conservative primarily through experience rather than through learning or background.
Absolutely.
And so as a Conservative, having somebody like that in the upper reaches of the civil servant wouldn't have gone down too well, you're saying?
It went down. Look, I was the epitome of a public servant to one government, and I was the devil of another. I remember someone very high up in the Labour Party told me that Helen Clark used to call me the devil in a dress. It was a very unusual situation in New Zealand, and a lot of people, for a long time I was public enemy number one, the most hated person in New Zealand. I had my own police protection squad because I had bullets with my name carved on them. I had threats every day until my court case, when people heard the other side of the story, and then only in New Zealand would it happen, but I became a celebrity. So it's, I just can't even explain to you. I look back at that time, I had this career where I went from being on domestic purposes benefit to becoming a temporary clerk to having this wildly successful career that I never expected. It was a glowing career. They sent me everywhere that was failing and every time I fixed it. And suddenly I fell foul of the government who just hated everything I did. I remember being told that who did I think I was getting beneficiaries into basic paying jobs. If I thought that was success, I needed to resign.
Mm. Well, you have some pretty strong views then upon what's happened in the last 3 years, Christine, and obviously you entered the political processes yourself. You were former chief executive of the Conservative Party. That would...
Yes.
Yeah, I know. That didn't turn out so well.
No.
Can I just
ask... It was
an
amazing experience.
Well, yes, it was, and it's good for you to have had that experience too, but it'd be a waste if you didn't utilise it in the present or in the future. You fell out essentially with Colin Craig during, what was it, the campaign 6 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah, it was 2017, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, no, 2014.
Was it 2014?
Yeah, it was.
Because they were looking likely, and then it all sort of blew apart.
Absolutely. He did an absolutely remarkable job, Michael. That party was 3 years old. We had 16,000 members, more than the Labour Party at the time. We had 2,000 when I became the chief executive, but we drove that really hard. We had a candidate in every single electorate. There were all kinds of complications because Colin invested millions into that party, and that's what you've got to do if you want to be successful. He had it. He was willing to do it. The problem was he made the final decisions about everything. It was his money. He had the right to do that. We would have made it had he just been a little bit more sensible about a few things. We were on the brink of being in there.
Yeah, well, self-made men all have that problem. Bob Jones had it. You would have been aware of that 20 years beforehand.
Absolutely.
Jim Anderton had it. The one person who seems to have escaped it, or at least resurrects himself on a continual basis, is Winston Peters. But, yeah. Oh, and, well, you see, Winston's got political acumen. I don't know if Colin did.
Oh, he certainly has. It was a shame with Colin. Colin is very charismatic when you meet him. He's hugely intelligent. And he has a very serious disease, which makes him walk in a most unusual way. And the media gave him hell because of the way he walked and the way he looked. And I used to say to him, Colin, you need to go out and tell people why this happens to you. And he wouldn't. It's become public since, but he thought people would see it as a weakness. They would have actually seen it as a strength because he lives every day with incredible pain and he copes amazingly well. Michael, that politics is a very cruel business and they'll go after you for anything, and he stood for Christian values, I suppose. I liked the values and the ethics, and I thought that was required in politics and that they had a part to play, which is why I became so dedicated to the cause. But he was a human being after all, and he got into trouble. It ruined it all because you can't set yourself up as a Christian party at the right hand of God and do anything silly.
No, well, that's true. You are held to a higher standard. And anyhow, you're absolutely right. You acquire an enemies just by the fact that you are Christian or conservative.
Absolutely. Any other religion in New Zealand is honoured and respected, but if you're a Christian, you look at Bob McCoskrie, all that he has done for this country, for families, he should be knighted. He never will be. blocked out of everything because he has Christian values. It's unbelievable, really, that we've ended up in this position.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, I'm interested, just before I ask you about fruit and veggies and stuff like that, I'm interested in who you're thinking of voting for, if you don't mind me asking, in 2 months' time. So I'm not asking you who you're going to vote for. I'm asking you, who would you lean towards at the moment if there was an election, well, today?
National, definitely. Our country is in one hell of a state. We are in such trouble. In fact, I don't know how they're going to turn it back. It's going to take huge skill, and they're our only hope. I hope that they are mixed with ACT, because I believe ACT is tougher about some of the things that need to be faced, and that race relations is one of the big ones. That's divided our country in a way that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, and they're going to have to be very, very clear, and they seem to be speaking about it in a much clearer way now. Winston is obviously going to be in there, but I think he's going to be a player on the edge.
Now, one of the criticisms of the National Party also used to be, I think it was particularly on Simon Bridges, that the party had gone quite Christian, if you like, conservative Christian, on many...
Hell, I don't see it like that.
Well, you don't see it like that now, or you think they've changed since Simon Bridges?
No, I never saw that when Simon Bridges was around either. Is that because he was a Catholic? I find that amazing. No, I didn't see any of that. I mean, they've had conscience votes, for example, our extreme abortion laws. The vast majority of them have voted for them. So, yeah, I don't see that at all.
I guess if you take something that's a bit more sort of mainstream, should we say voluntary euthanasia, for example, at that time, I think Bill English obviously was resolutely opposed as a leader. Simon Bridges was as well. That was clearly out of step with the national mood. And obviously a lot of ACT voted, a lot of people for voluntary euthanasia, so a lot of Conservative folk did vote for voluntary euthanasia at the last election. Maybe that was part of the reason, Christine?
Yeah, look, maybe it was. I've never seen it. Well, I've never even considered it previously. But, yeah, I mean, maybe it was. Maybe it was. They're certainly not like that now.
No,
I think that they fight to be in the middle, and that's why they need the strength of a party that can allow itself to be tougher over some things that we need to deal with.
Actually, I think your observation's very astute on that. I think that Chris Luxon does fight to be in the middle. He resists being dragged to the right, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Absolutely, he does.
And that's what's causing ACT to have, well, particularly people from the rural and provincial areas, but not just, probably yourself as well, might consider ACT as an alternative because they'll put some spine and steel, they hope, into the National Party.
I hear that absolutely everywhere, although as Chris Luxon moves around and people are seeing him a lot more in person, people who were telling me that they were going to split their vote, once they've seen him, they come back and say, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I found that interesting.
All right. Now, you were, I don't know if you still are, Deputy Mayor of the Taupo District Council, and you served... Are you still there?
No, I'm still on council, but I stood against the mayor, and he was very clear with me that if I did and I ran a big campaign, I would not be the deputy mayor this time, and I knew that going into it.
Nice.
That's the way it is. But
okay,
yeah,
but you're still on the council, though.
Yes. Highest polling candidate, thank goodness.
Oh, well done. Congratulations. So you still are interested in politics and using politics as a means of changing things.
Absolutely.
But you still need a real job. And because, you know, let's be honest about it, I can't imagine that the Taupo District Council is a full-time job. It might be a little bit of pin money, but won't be much more than that.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So you were going to be working for something called the Transforming Justice Foundation. I've never heard of that until I read the New Zealand Herald story 2 days ago. What's the Transforming Justice Foundation?
Well, it had been formed about 2 years before, and they came to me about 6 months before I signed an employment contract with them, asking me if I wanted to be involved, and I'd never heard of them then either, but they were looking to change justice in a range of ways, and part of that was child abuse, and you would probably know that I've fought child abuse for many years. I was the chief executive of For the Sake of Our Children Trust, which was an anti-abuse trust, and we did a hell of a lot of work, and that's why I was interested in being involved with them. It was from the perspective of child abuse, because I don't know if you've noticed, because I know you always had a big interest in it, nobody talks about it anymore. My phone used to run hot all the time. No one comes anywhere near me.
Yeah. And just as many people are being killed and abused, or children every day. Yeah.
Yeah, the stats are terrible. They're just getting worse and worse and worse.
And it's appalling that the Liberals of this world, whether they're policymakers, politicians, or the media, Christine, as you would know, refuse to acknowledge it. And the reason they primarily do is because of the outstanding ethnicity of many of the victims as well as the offenders.
Yes, and I was very outspoken about that, and I said it was not a race issue, it was an issue, they made it into a race issue. It needed to be an issue of care for our children and saving those kids. But, it's completely gone. We're not allowed to talk about it. It doesn't get reported. You never know the ethnicity anymore, but you do in the stats, and it's still really, really bad. But, of course, that's our fault for what we did 200 years ago, and that, to me,
that's right.
inexcusable.
Yeah, that's right. Now, having said that, but it's another topic for another time, and you and I must talk more about that in the future, because you've reminded me, to be perfectly honest with you, Christine, you've reminded me of how articulate you are, and how connected you are. So I needed to be reminded because I'm getting old. But the other thing that's down here is that the Transforming Justice Foundation, you got the job, they apparently didn't have the money for you, and so... you've ended up in some sort of dispute.
Yeah, and look, the story was that they had a provider from overseas whose child had run foul of the system, and he was going to loan them the money, and the chief executive was going to earn enough money to repay him, I suppose. And I didn't get paid, and that was fine. I just kept doing the work, and I kept asking, and the reality was I don't think they were ever going to pay. I don't think the board had any intention of, but I would have walked away. I got miffed, Michael, because they were talking to me quite sensibly. They'd paid me $10,000. I just wanted them to pay the tax on that. And suddenly they got a lawyer who was really nasty, who twisted the whole thing into something it wasn't. And I thought, I am not putting up with this, and I did not want to go near the Employment Authority, believe you me. But it was just wrong. And I suppose it was to make them wake up to the fact you can't just go around willy-nilly creating organisations and employing people with no intention of paying them.
Yeah, that's called wrong. And but you're
wrong.
Now you're in front of there's an employment tribunal. Is that where you are at the moment?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is.
And that's a relatively informal thing. Once it gets to the employment court, you get the lawyers involved and everything like that.
Yeah.
You're expecting this issue to be resolved either at the tribunal or hopefully by both parties prior to then?
Yes, they're asking for mediation again. We went to mediation. The other side didn't speak. They just played on their computer. They didn't look at me. They didn't speak. They wouldn't have any discussion whatsoever. So they're sending us back to mediation again, and I'm hoping there will be an outcome from this, because this is just silly. It really is silly, and it's caused a lot of stress for everyone, I'm sure, and it'd be great if it was just over. I would have walked away very simply a long time ago, but you can't let things that are wrong pass by. You've got to stand up for what's right, and that's what I've done.
And on that note, I thank you very much for talking to us, Christine. I wish you well in your endeavours. Nice to talk to you. We'll talk to you again soon. Because it's 1:00 and it's coming up to that right now. One of the great things about working in this Wellington studio is that I've got a clock that just goes tick, 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 and it tells me that. I wanted to talk to you about Lauren Dickerson. We'll talk tomorrow about that because the jury will, obviously. And I'd love to get your views on the evidence you've seen. I can't imagine anybody in New Zealand doesn't have an opinion on this.